In this lesson, we're going to focus our attention on understanding appropriate components that need to be considered in the development and design of user domain policies. Specifically, in this lesson, what we want to do is explore the type of users on a network and analyze what are the individual needs of those users. And so when we talk about the needs of those users, we want to take into consideration how they will be accessing the networks and what risks might be involved. And so in order for us to focus on this, we'll need to make sure that we have appropriate security policies in place so that any risks that are likely to occur for the user are mitigated and minimized. And so there are a number of different concepts that we want to consider. Our key learning objective is to ensure that we have an understanding of how to describe different information system security policies. And the key concepts to keep in mind involve understanding the reasons for governing users with policies, understanding the difference between regular and privileged users, exploring acceptable use policy and privilege level access agreements, and understanding security awareness policy. And so there are some key differences that can be identified between those public and private domain policies, and we will explore that starting in this first part of our lessons. So one thing that we need to make sure that we keep in mind is understanding how to analyze the weakest link in the information security chain. And so for the most part, security experts consider people to be a part of one of the biggest problems with our security, and in that most users are going to be the weakest link. And so we can incorporate and utilize various automated security controls to help people with different skill levels. And that is where we understand the different policies that need to be in place and applied to ensure that the weakest link in our information security chain is protected. So we have to keep that in mind, that this means that social engineering can come in many forms, and it can occur at any time within an organization. And so this is important because human mistakes often occur and can lead to security breaches. And people who use computers have different skill levels. And so their perceptions of information security vary. And this means that some users are going to be more security conscious than other users. And so we have to account for the variance in those types of perceptions. Another thing to consider in analyzing the weakest link in information security chains is that most significant threats come from within an organization, within an organization from an insider. And so what does this mean? This means that we can have applications that have weaknesses that are not known. And typically what will happen is those weaknesses get exploited by users, either knowingly or unknowingly. So in order to reduce this, we need to have appropriate mechanisms, security awareness training and such in place so that we can remove or more accurately protect the weakest link in our security chain. And so we have to consider that we have various types of users within our system. And using this is where we need to take into consideration how social engineering can be used and applied. And so essentially with social engineering, we want to make sure that we manipulate the system so that the weakest link in our security chain is protected. And so this can be in the form of having appropriate safeguards in place for users that have less um, tenure so that they have an appropriate guide and someone that is overseeing them if security is compromised. And so we have different types of users that we need to consider, and these users could be exploited through various things, such as phishing, spear phishing, or whaling, which is similar to phishing, but it's more targeted based off of a hypothetical situation. And so we need to analyze the roles that each of our users play and how we can best protect them within our security chain. And so there are various domains that we have, and 7 domains for our IT infrastructure consist of different types of users, and each type of user is going to have different access requirements. And so we can have, of course, um, employees, and these could be salaried or hourly staff members of our organization. We can also have system administrators. Now, system administrators, they're going to be employees who work in the IT department, and they're there to help provide appropriate technical support for appropriate systems and mechanisms. We can also have security personnel too, and these will be the individuals that are responsible for helping to develop and design appropriate security policies and programs for the organization and stakeholders. We also can have contractors. Contractors are going to be likely exemplified as temporary workers, and they could, in fact, be within any role within an organization. They just are managed directly by appropriate personnel from the company that is an employee. Then we have various vendors that need to be taken into consideration, and vendors are going to be outside companies and individuals that work for such companies. We're also going to have guests and general public that are involved, and these can be specific users who have access to a specific set of applications or features on the system. And then we're going to have also control partners, and these will be individuals who are usually going to evaluate controls for design and effectiveness. In addition to these human user types, we have to recognize that there are going to be different access needs. And so keeping this into consideration, we need to ensure that system accounts are non-human accounts that are going to be used by the system to support automated services. And so we have various types of users that are going to be on the system. In this diagram, we have an example that shows a relationship between Oracle database and a Microsoft SQL database administrators. And so we have the head of the database administration, and then you have various teams for the different user types. You have the DB2 DBA team, you have the MS SQL DBA team, and then you have the Oracle DBA team. So this is showing a comparison between various database administrators and the different types of databases. And then we see branching below from the MS SQL database team, we have a subtypes for that can be utilized as well. And so this is just an example showing that the system has various database entities, and most users in the system are going to be attached to the MS SQL database team. And so these are some typical examples that are associated with the user domain. And so one thing that we want to consider is a process called a firecall ID process. And this is important because it provides for identification of information that can be utilized in order to detect patterns of problems. And so there are various processes that can be put in place in order to facilitate capturing business requirements and elevating those privileges appropriately. And so essentially what we have is a firecall ID process that can be used to provide temporary elevated access to unprivileged users. And so this name can be applied, and it implies that there is a sense of urgency for granting this type of access as well. And so the process activity is going to start with a request for access. And this is the activity involves the user reports problems to the help desk. The help desk documents issues in a repair ticket, and then the help desk will assign an on-call administrator as well. And so once this is completed and the document business reason for access is documented, then the access can be approved. And this process activity involves the help desk manager approving that repair ticket. Once that is approved, then the administrator will log onto the firecall ID system and to obtain elevated rights. And this allows for temporary access to be granted, but with elevated privileges. Then this allows for the administrator to fix problems, log into the firecall ID system to document and fix and suspected cause and close the repair ticket. So the problem is fixed and resolution is reached. Then the firecall ID system can temporarily remove access once the ticket is closed. The temporary access is removed and the password reset if necessary. Then the manager is able to check the logs to verify any access issues and ensure that the problem has been resolved. So this provides us with a basic understanding of the firecall process and how it can be utilized. And essentially this amounts to there being a trouble ticket that it serves as a complete record of what access was granted and the specific reason that that access was needed. And so we can have various applications that we're able to have access to. And so one example of this would be if we have a application that is going to be an application that connects to a backend server. And so there are different components that we have to consider with this in mind. So if we have a public wireless access network, and that's a user accesses through the internet, we have to consider what needs to be taken into effect with this. And so we can consider a DMZ application, and what that is a demilitarized zone application. And basically it allows for someone to look up, to enter a zip code and find out the city for that zip code. And what this usually does is this means that it's going to use structured query language injection to submit a 5-digit zip code. And so this provides for appropriate mechanisms that need to be in place in order to access the system appropriately. And so you'll have a common form of attack is a SQL injection, and this allows for a culprit to enter a SQL command and place inside an input field. And what hackers hope is that once this is entered, it's passed to the database query that execute it, and then they can execute their own commands on the database. So network controls ensure that only traffic from the DMZ application to the database server are allowed. And so in this example, we need to keep in mind the various components that are involved. We have a application that needs to be accessed. We have the network, which allows for users to access the application. And we have our databases, which provide for protection to protect the data. And so what we need to keep in mind is that we need to have specific security policies in place that can document and protect the various controls that are needed for accessing to the DMZ application. And so a lot of times hackers will try to target the public-facing internet sites in order to gain access to these types of components. And so at a high level, we want to think of the DMZ application as having two main purposes, cleaning the user input and manning secure communications. And so this provides us for a back-end way to access the system through the firewall. And the firewall can perform additional content verification. And once that is approved, it can actually process the transaction. And so with this in mind, it's a little bit of ensuring that appropriate guests have access to the application and that hackers are not able to penetrate the security mechanisms that are in place, such as the firewall as well. And so it's important to keep in mind that we also have various control partners that are going to be into play. And control partners can be individuals such as auditors, operational risk, or compliance professionals, or regulators. And so we can think of these in terms of having contingent accounts. And contingent accounts need unlimited rights to install, configure, repair, and recover networks and applications, and also appropriate access to restore data. The credentials are going to be prime targets for hackers, and IDs are not assigned to these individuals until a disaster recovery event is declared. In addition, you can also have system accounts, and system accounts are used when elevated privileges are needed to start, stop, and manage system services. These type of accounts can be interactive or non-interactive, and system accounts can also be referred to as service accounts as well. And so why do we have a need for being able to govern user policies? Well, organizations need to have a single view of risk. And so this can mean for a number of different things. We need to have a view of risk that is in place so that decisions can be made quickly and easily, that involves proper coordination with regulators and shareholders. So we want to have security policies that can offer a common way to view and control any risk. Additionally, we also want to ensure that we are in compliance with appropriate regulations for the implementation of needed security policies. And so we need to be able to govern users with policies because they require different access. Users require information from different systems. Data is going to have different security controls as well. And so there are different types of regulations to consider. So the Act of 2002 has specific requirements that should be in place. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act is what is utilized in order to protect medical data. And the European Data Protection Directive is what is utilized to provide global organization with appropriate laws and regulations as well. So these are just a number of different well-defined policies that exist to provide organizations with appropriate guidelines and laws for compliance that can be approved by regulators as needed.